I want to go over some facts about the EMP threat from terrorist rogue states, China and Russia, that even if already mentioned, deserve repeating and emphasis. You know, if you take nothing else away from the conference in terms of the threat, please remember these things. Even a crude first-generation nuclear weapon, a tactical nuclear artillery shell stolen or purchased from the Russians, for example, can be used to make an EMP attack that could inflict catastrophic consequences on the unhardened civilian infrastructure. How do we know that? You know, we know that because the EMP Commission was not just a paper commission. It was unique among congressional commissions in that it actually had a scientific arm. We actually purchased modern electronic equipment, critical kinds of equipment that are vital to the infrastructures, put them into an EMP simulator, and fried them, you know, to see just what is the threat, what are the field strengths. A lot of these tests hadn't been performed since the Cold War, and they were unprecedented, and the Commission is the only one who collected the data on it to see what would happen. A lot of people anticipated what was going to happen anyway, because as was noted by an earlier speaker, modern electronics are 1,000,000 times more vulnerable, you know, than the electronics of the 1960s. And they're 100,000 times more vulnerable than the transistors, you know, from the 1970s. So we verified what was suspected, that yes, you know, the very thing that has made our economy, you know, so much more efficient and created a microelectronics revolution that is basically undergirds our modern civilization, is also an Achilles heel, extremely vulnerable to any nuclear weapon. Doesn't have to be a very high-yield weapon or a weapon of special design. Next, nor is an ICBM or a long-range missile needed to make an EMP attack. You know, as has been noted several times, one of the nightmare scenarios the Commission had, you know, was a Scud short-range missile. These are ubiquitous on the world market. Even private collectors can purchase Scuds. In fact, in the Commission, when we were doing our research, you know, we actually came across a photograph of a Scud that was sitting on the dock at San Francisco. It wasn't even in a containment in a container. You know, it was a live Scud. Didn't have fuel in it. Didn't have a live warhead, but it was a workable Scud that had been purchased by a private collector in Ohio. This was before 9/11, and it was going to his collection. And the picture shows a security guard looking quizzically at this thing. That's how loose, you know, the missile technology control regime was before 9/11. Even Yemen, and not the government of Yemen, but Yemeni rebels who are very fond of Al-Qaeda, you know, have Scuds at their disposal. So these weapons are everywhere, and even a private individual can afford to buy them. And these things could be used in a ship, you know, to execute an EMP attack. Anything that can deliver a nuclear weapon above an altitude of 30 kilometers, which is where the EMP effect begins, could be used to make an EMP attack. You know, there are heavy lift meteorological balloons, you know, that are not very expensive, that could loft a tactical nuclear weapon or even heavier nuclear weapons above that altitude. So even with some categories of meteorological balloon, you know, you could do this attack. As to that ship-launched theory, that ship-launched idea, is it just a theory? Dave Trachtenberg referred to the fact that, you know, we know Iran has been doing this strange thing, you know, launching missiles, Scud missiles, ballistic missiles, you know, off of a vessel in the Caspian Sea. Strange that they would do that, you know, because they have the Shahab-3 medium-range ballistic missile, which, from Iran, has enough range to strike any of their enemies in the Middle East. They can strike any of their enemies in the Middle East right now with the Shahab-3. So why would you need to launch a missile off of a ship? Well, obviously, you know, the only reason to do that is because you would be interested in attacking somebody not in the Middle East. I don't think it's too hard to connect the dots from there. We cannot rule out that North Korea, which is already a nuclear weapons state, might sell nuclear weapons to Iran, since North Korea has illegally sold missiles to Iran and to Pakistan. And North Korea has a history of being willing to illegally sell anything to anyone. We cannot rule out that North Korea and Iran may be collaborating in their nuclear weapon programs, since the AQ-CON network established the precedent of illicit collaboration between rogue states on nuclear weapon programs. And since, according to press reports, you know, Iranian scientists were present at both North Korean nuclear tests. We cannot rule out that Iran might transfer nuclear weapons and missiles to terrorists, since Iran is the world's leading sponsor of international terrorism. And since Iran's new defense minister, Ahmad Vahidi is himself a known terrorist. And since Iran is actively transferring ever more destructive weapons to Hezbollah and other international terrorists. Now, a word about super EMP weapons. Probably the first time you're hearing that phrase today. There are very low-yield weapons that are specifically designed for EMP, that create extraordinarily high EMP fields. The Russians call them super EMP weapons, and they were developing these things at the end of the Cold War so that they could have a bomb that could win a nuclear war with one blow, a single nuclear weapon, that would create such high EMP field strengths. According to their open source military writings, 200 kilovolts, that's 200,000 volts in the intense fields, and 100 kilovolts, that's 100,000 volts per meter at the horizon. So if you've got an antenna that's 1 meter long, you're running 100,000 volts to that meter. That's what that means. So if the antenna, for example, if it's a power line, is 2 meters long, or a line that goes from your personal computer, the electric cord is 2 meters long, you've got 200 volts running through the meter. 3 meters long, 300,000 volts on the horizon, at the edge of the effect, which are field strengths that are far beyond, certainly, what the unhardened civilian infrastructure and the Russians in their military writings believed that this was also far above the hardening that we were doing to our strategic forces in command and control. In their open source military writings today, they openly declare that they have these super EMP weapons in their inventory. And the Chinese also claim to be in possession of them. And unfortunately, the super EMP nuclear weapon, these weapons of special design, are not hard to make. They are not beyond the technological grasp of countries like Iran and North Korea. And the Commission found that design information for these weapons was actually openly available, if they knew the right place to look. Openly available for over 25 years. That if you were a scientist, nuclear weapons scientist, and you were paging through, unfortunately, the websites of the right agencies of the U.S. government, for example, you might be able to find out what you need to know.